Hello, and welcome to another episode of Shortcut, the podcast that takes you on a shortcut to developer experience, developer productivity, and product engineering. My name is Morten.
And I'm Marilag.
And today we are taking kind of a retrospective look at the past episodes that we've done, and also just diving a little bit into starting a podcast and what this means, because I think one of the things that we haven't talked too much about is the focus on having something that's based in Europe. There's a lot of podcasts out there already that talk about developer experience and developer productivities in different shapes and form. But a lot of them, at least the ones that we follow, are very focused on US companies, US-based companies that are typically very big. And we wanted to take a different perspective, also just in regards to the culture that we believe is fairly different in Europe than it is in the US. And this is some of the things that we would like to highlight through our podcast, right? That European perspective on product engineering.
When we talk about developer experience, we put the human in the center. And that's also really different especially in Scandinavian setting, right? The perception of productivity, of success is very different. And that's what we have actually learned from all our guests for the past 3 months.
Yeah. Should we dive a little bit into that?
Yeah, let's. I think we could, zoom in a little bit into the different lessons that we learned specifically around using internal developer portals. What is really the value of internal developer portals?
Yeah. So one of the things that was highlighted, at least that I remember, is Vakesh talking about starting small. So when you do start on a developer portal journey, start small. Don't do the whole shebang or big bang release to roll something out, but start small and talk with users. That's really an important part, right? Talking with users.
Yeah, talking with users and talking with business as well, and aligning their goals, because the goals of the business, of course, is quite different, especially, like I mentioned, if you are not inherently a software engineering organization, software company, then your business goals can be very much different from a product goal of a developer portal. So the question is always like, why do we want to invest in this? And first of all, how much do we need to invest? So if you start with a roadmap of a lot of different features and functionality, you can easily get into a lot of complexity, and then also dependency on different teams inside the organization. And then suddenly it's hard to validate or to verify the value of that investment. And you might not get a buy-in right away from the business.
Yeah.
But if you start small, and then I remember Wakas also mentioning that you have to really understand the pain point.
Yeah.
1-2 pain points. Of course, there's a lot of pain points, right?
Yeah.
But maybe the pain point that has a huge impact to the organization if you solve it, and that doesn't have to be a big feature.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and you don't necessarily need like a giant team to get started. You can start with just being a few developers who are passionate about doing this thing. And then it becomes, let's say, maybe more of a community initiative to start with. And at least you get something started, you get something out there, you can kind of prove to the rest of the business that it actually provides value, what you're building, and that it's useful. And we also talked, so we talked a little bit in the beginning about also these different organizations' sizes. And one of the things that was also highlighted in some of the episodes is that not everyone needs an internal developer platform or portal. There are many different sizes of organizations, and when we talk about developer portals, it's typically for the bigger organizations, right, where you have a lot of developers that need access to each other in some way or shape or form, and maybe they are so big that you don't know everyone. You can't just go to all teams and ask them, where do I find documentation for this API? Who do I talk to get a cloud subscription, for example? So that's something where you put that into a portal. But if you're a small team and everyone knows each other, then maybe a wiki page is just enough, because then you can put that in there. These are the licenses that we have for the different things. Maybe they just have one cloud subscription, so that's not really an issue. So depending on your size and what you need to get out of it, then maybe a wiki page might be sufficient. Maybe even just creating a GitHub repository and putting in a README, and everyone knows that when they need to know something, they go there. They can use it for onboarding as well, maybe. But there's just a lot of different ways to provide information for your team. So that's also something to consider on the different sizes of the teams.
Yeah, I remember Rasmus Houd said that as long as you have software engineers in your organization, maybe not 2 or 3, maybe around 10 software engineers building, technical products, then you need to think about developer experience. But developer experience doesn't necessarily mean you have a developer portal, because you're right. A developer experience means focusing on what they really need. And based on all of our interviews, it seems to be like the primary need of developers is to just find the things that they need, the discovery part, and this means actually three elements based from all our talks. They need to find the API, meaning the data. I remember Casper Jensen also talking about data, discovery, discovering the source of data, which API to connect to so that I can get that data. So that seems to be like a universal pain point for everyone. And then finding the right documentation, and then finding the right tools.
Yeah.
So those 3 things. So you're right, if we're only 10 software engineers, you need to still improve that developer experience by just agreeing on a single place to find all these things.
Yeah, I think one thing that also stood out to me was Thomas, who talked about the importance of onboarding also, that it's easy to get a new developer up and running fast. I think from his perspective, it was getting them to push code to production on the first day, ideally. So when you start looking at having everything in place, and let's say that, I guess that's also part of the developer experience, but having your pipelines work really efficiently, but also just that what we talked about for small teams, having a GitHub repository might be sufficient, and you can also use that as part of your onboarding. So for that developer who's starting or moving into the team, for that matter, they can go there, they can read through the documentation that you have in your repository or in your wiki, and then use that to say, okay, well, this is what I need to clone down, and this is what I need to do to get started. I can then check the Agile board, find the task to do, and then commit the code, and then hopefully it's off to production.
Yeah.
So that's a really good developer experience, I would say, for a developer starting day one. They can actually get up and running and push code to production.
Yeah,
in an ideal scenario, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good way to test where you are in this journey, how good your developer experience is. That's when you onboard either a new developer or maybe an external consultant who wants to help you. If maybe you have an immediate problem and then you need an external team as an accelerator, and then it will depict the purpose of an accelerator if this team comes in and then they couldn't find what they need. We talked to different organizations. Still a lot. It seems to be that there's still a lot of companies where onboarding is still a major problem.
Yeah. And so we said not everyone needs a developer portal, but everyone needs automation.
Yeah.
And I think this plays into like having the things in place so you can get up and running fast, not waiting weeks. Because I think submitting a ServiceNow ticket is not really automation.
It's also not enough to have a single page. I think it was Thomas who mentioned this. A single page where it says there, go talk to Morten.
Yeah.
And then Morten comes with his own notes of manual, tasks. It's not enough that you have a documentation. You have to start thinking about how you can optimize these processes and also think about, not being dependent to a single person to execute this task.
So what you mentioned about talking to a specific person, I think one of the things I really like from team topologies is their notion of a team API and having that in your repository so people can actually know who to talk to. Because one thing is finding a repository, another thing is who's the team behind this. You don't have to look through the Git history to find out the name of a person, but you actually have a what's called a team API, where you can go and see who's on the team, what's their kind of office hours, how do I approach them, are they open for receiving pull requests, and stuff like this. So between teams, I think that's a really nice way of interacting, instead of, I say, the usual maybe old ways of going around the office and finding, well, where's Bob? Because I'm pretty sure Bob is the one who created this API, but now you actually know you have the API in your GitHub or wherever, that you can see, okay, well, this is the team API for the team who is exposing this API. So I think that's a really nice thing. One other thing I would mention is having this overview. One of the nice things that the developer portals actually brings, especially to large organizations, right, where you have a bunch of developers, having or using the developer portal to get an overview, to create a sense of transparency for the people on the different teams, that they can actually go and find the things that they would need to do their job in a single place.
Mm-hmm. And that is also extremely important, to spend a little time to think about what you mean with transparency and overviews, right? Because if you're, for example, a product like Backstage, a catalog of APIs and a catalog of applications and software that you're building comes out of the box, it's so easy to start using it. And that's fine, that's great. But then if you're an organization that has, like a couple of thousands, 100,000s of microservices and APIs all exposed as APIs, and then you just dump a bunch of them into the portal and call it discovery, it certainly is a first step, but it should never end there.
No, yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, that when you adopt something like Backstage, for example, that you don't just install it and then say to developers, now there's a place for catalog, so just onboard your teams, create your entry in the catalog, and then bada boom, we are done. We have discoverability, but no, it's actually not that easy, and it's not that straightforward. I mean, installing Backstage is not even step one, right? That's maybe even before getting to step one, that you actually need to get up and running.
So once you start exposing all your tools, APIs, documentation, products, you have to start thinking about information architecture and the curation of information. And as much as possible, you will improve the experience of the developer if you take an extra step to kind of only show, or maybe have an automatic filter to see what is already relevant for that developer. Otherwise, it's going to be very frustrating to go in, and then you have thousands of results, and then you have to figure out how to navigate into this list and find what you need. And I think we need to mature as an organization to also properly annotate and put metadata on these artifacts to make it findable. But then it's a challenge, because I understand we're developers. That's not our primary responsibility. We already built the technology. We're already building the product and developing the APIs. And we even took time to write the documentation. And now we have to put metadata and annotate this so that others can find it. So I know it's not an easy problem, but it certainly requires some effort for the organization. And then again, going back to understanding what's in it for the business. If we need to invest in this, we need to invest on an information architecture to catalog our assets. What does it mean for the business? It's always like, are we earning more revenue here, or are we reducing cost because we're becoming more productive? So I guess it's also the responsibility of the engineering organization to align those.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is probably around, or centers around, efficiency of the different teams, right? That maybe before they had to email someone or call up someone to get a cloud subscription, or to get access to an SRE service, maybe, if that's something they are either have internally or buying from outside. Someone needs to get a hold of a credit card, and then it takes time just to do the onboarding of that, right? So I think if So going back to efficiency, if you have this in a central location and you have the automation in place, so you can onboard, you can do all the self-service, right? We always talk about self-service when we talk about developer portals. And I think that's a super important aspect. And so if your company is so big that you have capabilities within your company that you're exposing to the software teams or the product teams, then why not have like a marketplace for that? So you know, as a developer, this is where I go to when I need an SRE service or whatever that might be, on-call feature, that you can go there, onboard, and this is where you can find those types of things. And then you have a different location for APIs where if I need to integrate with your service, I know that I can go to this part of the portal to find the APIs that are available. I can find the ones that are within my area, for example, or if there's a specific thing that is tagged with, let's just say, weather. That's the classical API example. I need to find the weather forecasting for Copenhagen. So I go in, search for that, and hopefully it's been tagged in the right way so you can actually find it. But I think from my perspective also, I think one side is, of course, the business, but then also for the teams and the developers to use it. I think it's super important that there's also a focus around the teams, because for a developer portal to be efficient and to work in a really nice way, I think the teams has to have an incentive to go there. So I think if the team also has kind of a home in that portal, that gives them an incentive to actually go there. If they have, let's say, the landing page maybe, or when you go into the portal, you're automatically redirected to your team's location. You can see your team members. You can see what accesses your team have, the cloud subscriptions they have access to, maybe see how they are faring in regards to compliance, if that's important to the team. Maybe it's cloud costs, maybe they have a budget that they need to adhere to, that they actually can see, okay, how much are we actually spending on cloud? Is it going up? Is it going down? Are we within the budget? And if we start consuming different other services, what's our budget for this? If the team owns that budget. If we talk about empowered product teams, then hopefully they also own some budget that they can utilize for different purposes. And then also going a little bit outside of the team, then doing the self-service, onboarding into services that are exposed by other teams, exposing your services to other teams as well. So having that available, or having that option in the developer portal to actually do these things and expose capabilities, utilize capabilities from others, I think is super important, and some other things that needs to be in place in order for the developer portal to be successful.
Right. And I really like your take on it, to look at this as, we call it developer portal, but it's not just an individual developer. It is actually inherently for teams. And yeah, I also like how you framed it, that there should be an incentive for them. But next to the incentive is that it also requires some level of maturity and also excellence when you do these things, because you cannot just, there's a responsibility that comes with it once you expose the products that you're building or the APIs that you're building for consumption. And that's when, the product mindset comes to play. And I think we're going to talk about that in the next episodes, because it's not easy. One thing is building the software, but then building that software as a service, that's fun. But then internally, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of things you need to think about. It doesn't have to be super complex, but you need to take off your engineering hat every now and then think about, okay, there are actually users of these APIs, and there are there are dependencies. And so I'm not just responsible in making sure that the features are developed. I'm also responsible in making sure that, it's discoverable, but that it's reliable and that it's cost effective.
Yeah.
So that's the whole engineering excellence part, right? And that another thing is like reliability, that when it's down, there's also transparency. You talked about how you be able to show real-time stats on these applications, because down the line, someone's life is dependent.
Yeah. Well, I think actually what we can kind of tie these things together with you mentioned maturity. We talked about transparency. I think one nice thing is when you have this team focus in your developer portal, that you can also expose your pipelines and how they've progressed. Let's say also expose your availability for your service. Make that public to everyone who has access to the developer portal. That when they go and click into your team, they want to use your API, but how does that actually look like? Because I think if the team is mature, then of course they should expose their availability, that the pipelines are always succeeding and never failing. Maybe that's a little bit ambitious, but at least you can see that they're actually doing a good job and their availability is on point with what they expose in their SLA or state in their SLA. So I think that maturity in, I think we call it maybe DevOps maturity or engineering excellence, maybe a combination of those two, and then with transparency, that it's just out there, it's exposed to everyone, because we're actually as a team proud of what we do, and we expose these metrics to everyone who wants to see it.
Right, and it's also there's another advantage to transparency. And this is key. This is knowledge sharing. And I see this a lot with some of the organizations that I also work with. As soon as you get something exposed, whether it's an endpoint and how they're built and the way they maybe just documented their APIs or what they're doing in terms of cost or their architecture, as soon as it's out there, first of all, of course, you as a team becomes a bit more responsible of what you get out there. But then the other teams start learning from how you're doing things. And that's super important. And speaking of learning, I remember one of our guests, Casper Jensen at Pandora, he was talking about how every now and then it's very important for the engineers of those products that they're building or APIs to also look at or take the perspective of the engineers using their products. Like sit with the other team. So that's also collaboration. And that's new for us, right? We're so focused on building our products, and then we put it out there, we created the documentation, and then we just expect that someone will find it and will be able to use it right away. That's very ideal. I think like that all the time. Like, oh, I did this really well. This is well engineered, and I put a lot of thoughts into this and architecture. And then I even wrote documentation, and then suddenly we get surprised that we get a lot of support calls, and then people can't use it or can't use it in their stack. So that's why I guess his suggestion is to, every now and then just sit with the users and then maybe code with the users and try to use your own API or your own product from their perspective.
Yeah, I think that's super healthy. Both trying it out for yourself, just kind of, of course, one danger is that when you know how it works, you have a tendency to click through the process and then it works. But if you're actually sitting with someone who hasn't done it before, and then you tell them, okay, please try and onboard into my new platform, or please try to onboard to my API, and then you see users doing it, then you might actually find out that maybe there are some things there that doesn't actually work, or maybe there's a manual step in the process where, because you know the product, okay, well, I just do this thing over here in GitHub, for example, and then it works. But the user doesn't have access to that part in GitHub, so they can't do it. And that maybe breaks the onboarding part of it. So I think there's a lot of things to learn by being close to your users and actually seeing them on board.
Right, and I think that's the key lesson. That's constant in all the episodes that we've had. Like the first episode with Rasmus, really talking about the users, and you're obsessed about your users, and not just external users, but your users. When we say users, the user groups, it's your colleagues. How hard can it be to go and talk to your colleagues and ask them what their experience or what they expect from you? And I think that's a central lesson across all this episodes.
And then when we talk about these many different teams and working together, I think one thing that's also been highlighted in a few different episodes is the importance of community and actually working together. And I think we recently attended a talk with Kent Beck. For a company, a big company in Copenhagen, I think we can say, where we're talking a little bit about these developers in different maybe silos of the company, I think we can say. in order for that to work well, from a developer perspective, you need to have community. You need to bring people together, so that to break down the silos, you need to learn from each other and sit together every once in a while. And that, I think that goes whether it's business domains, that you're in different domains, or whether it's in different departments, or if it's even tech silos.
We've now talked to several organizations that have succeeded in organizing their communities, and then the way it works is sometimes it's just an organic, like an organic growth for communities. Someone who's passionate about a certain tech stack starts a community, and then suddenly it grows, and then you have a group of people talking about the same stack or the same topics and learning from each other. And sometimes it's also a bit more organized communities where you still have a little bit of governance to make sure that you get out, you get something out of it, concrete. Let's say, for example, Thomas's story around that company, Templify, where they had guilds for each of the tech stack. And every Wednesday, I believe, they meet, and then there's actually technical decisions or architectural decisions that are being discussed in these guilds that's applied to all the other teams once they break out. So that's the way they use it, and I've seen that also in some of the organizations that I help. That it's community driven, but it's still there's concrete technical and business decisions that are made out of these communities by synthesizing the information and feedback from community members, but then turning that into actual documentation or to a charter even. So that can certainly work.
Yeah, I think another thing that community can also foster is having kind of an open source mindset within the company. So what I guess would often be referred to as inner sourcing. So when you don't have maybe a big team around it, be it a developer portal like has maybe started with just a few people, that you can actually get the involvement from other teams and have them contribute to it. And then even though this developer portal can be quite a big thing or big undertaking, if you can utilize the collective mind of different teams because they're interested in also making it succeed, that you can actually get those contributions. If you're open for it, that you can actually receive this and can kind of get work for free almost. Of course, it's not free, but it's in a different way, right? Because it's not adding additional developers to a team, and then it's one fixed team, but you can actually move quite a lot of things and make new capabilities. Maybe the teams themselves are seeing certain things that could be nice to have in the developer portal and actually contribute that back, which might not be on the developer portal team's roadmap itself. And I think just in many regards, inner sourcing can be quite beneficial to companies, and a way to gather work around different topics, right?
Yeah, certainly. So let's go back to that inner sourcing of the developer portal, because now we're zooming into the developer portal itself, right? So to summarize, you have to start small, but once it's there, it needs maintenance, and then it needs scale. You need to measure. You need matrices to see if you're getting the benefit out of this developer portal, and then you need a lot of contributions. So even though you start with maybe a small team and that grows a little bit, that takes care of the core portal, maybe to keep the lights on for this portal, making sure that if you're dependent on a product, let's say like Backstage or other frameworks, that it's always aligned with the direction of that product. But at the same time, someone to kind of make all the cross-cutting concerns around this portal. So you need a single team that focuses, a core team that focuses on keeping the developer portal running. But for the features and capabilities that are available on the developer portal, it is certainly coming not from that core team, but from the contributions of all the other teams that have a stake on it. And it's very important because you might end up, if you have a core team taking care of a developer portal, you might end up in a scenario where the other teams that want their capabilities into the portal becomes too dependent on the team. It's like, why should I build it? I'm already building, let's say, my platform. I need a self-service. I'm not part of the developer portal team. they should take care of building that. We've seen that also as a problem, right? So that's one thing that we need to avoid. So from the get-go, you have to be clear that this is a tool for the entire engineering organization. So everyone should contribute.
Yeah, I think that's super important that the teams realize that they have a stake in this as well. You can't just rely on some central team building everything for everyone. You have to contribute to that as well. And I think that's also part of being a community, right? That you contribute into building this and making it better for everyone. And I think one thing also is in regards to contributions, if you're in early stages of implementing a developer portal, for example, and you don't know how to contribute, I mean, one first thing you can do is provide feedback. I think that's the first thing you can do in ways of contributing is provide feedback to the ones that are actually making it. Because if there are things that doesn't really work, like if you're just exposing a catalog and no one's saying anything, then you might think, okay, well, this is fantastic. Now we have a catalog and we just focus all our efforts on this, but maybe the teams actually have a different need. And if no one's providing feedback and saying, well, actually, we would prefer that all of our open API specs are shown in the portal, and not just everything that we have in GitHub, if that's what you put in your catalog, for example.
What do you think prevents engineers from providing feedback to tools?
It's a good question. I think maybe a lot of it comes down to one part is often people are very busy. Maybe they don't have the capacity at the moment to provide feedback. I think to some extent maybe it's also some sense of, well, that's not really my job. They should just figure it out on themselves. They're developing the portal, so they should figure it out. So I think maybe there's a little bit of that. I think that's also why it's important that they're engaged in a community, because I think when you're part of a community, you have some shared sense of purpose or goal to some extent. So if you're all in on the developer portal, then I think you will also be very inclined to actually give feedback and voice your opinion around what's usable for us, let's say in this part of the business. What is it that we need from a developer portal? Is it a catalog? Or is it a very good search feature? Is it self-service? Maybe the teams are spending endless amount of time submitting ServiceNow tickets, following up on those tickets and actually getting an answer. So maybe for them, it's more about getting that self-service up and running. So they can click and then it's resolved. Click and then you get a cloud subscription, for example, or click and then you get access to whatever you need.
Yeah. And talking about like giving your feedback so that you can help, you also have to look at it in a way that it also help you as a developer with your giving feedback to the tooling, because then you start thinking about what is it that you really need to become productive. And sometimes we forget that, like we actually get so used to the normal ways of working. So if you got used to filing ServiceNow ticket and then used to waiting several days before you get onboarded on a tool or a platform, then you just start thinking this is normal. So you kind of have to break that normalcy. You know, I love the word, you know, not love, but like I always use the word complacency. We actually become very complacent on the things that are very, you know, usual in the organization. And it takes a lot of effort to just break out from that, you know, from the usual things and think out of the box and then say, hey, we need to change something around here. And the only way I can help, because I don't have so much time, but to, you know, give feedback. And another thing that I remember from one of our sessions is Thomas talking about, I think both Thomas and Susan, talked about continuous discovery, right? Like all these sessions for continuous discovery. And I actually started reading the book, Continuous Discovery by Teresa Torres. Have you read it?
Not yet. No, it's on my reading list.
And I like books like that because it offers really practical, actionable methodology that you can apply with minimal effort, I would say, from my perspective in the organization. And this continuous discovery is one of those really sensible way of just gathering feedback from, you know, different parts of the organization. Schedule if you're part of the product. So if you're the core team for an internal developer portal, or you are part of a team that's building capabilities or exposing your APIs or your capabilities within a developer portal, that means you have users. Then you start thinking about, okay, how do I get feedback so that I can improve this service? And then instead of of course you have all your normal agile rituals, but I think that continuous discovery is one of the most beneficial and effective ritual that you can invest time on. Once a week, just grab a colleague, offer coffee or something, and then start a conversation or send in some questions, but then block a time for that feedback session to happen. I think most engineers would love to get feedback, but in our busy schedule, we need blocked times in our calendar. Once you have it, they're very willing to provide information because they do understand the value of it. It's just you need to be a little bit more organized and sustainable process like you do with continuous discovery. So I highly suggest you read that book as well if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I think for anyone who's maybe not received user feedback or customer feedback before, the first time they actually get it, I think they actually also get a sense of, okay, this actually matters and we can actually make the product better by getting this feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of things to benefit from here. And then when we look ahead for the podcast, so for the next theme or for the next episodes, we have a theme around platform engineering, where we're going to dive into some different talks around the product or not product, product mindset in regards to platform engineering, but also a maturity model for platform engineering. And that was a kind of a new thing for me, that there's a maturity model.
There is, yeah.
And so we'll dive into that. We'll hear a little bit about, for a Danish company, their journey into platform engineering. So some interesting sessions also coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So we've heard about developer portals, and we've learned a lot from these talks already. I think there's been some interesting perspectives. So if you haven't heard them yet, then of course go back and hear all these great talks that we've had, or conversations around developer portals, and and we look forward to diving into platform engineering in the upcoming episodes.
Very exciting.
Cool.
Did we actually learn the best shortcuts so far from our guests?
I think we've there was a couple of different shortcuts, right? I think maybe the thing that we try with these shortcuts is, I remember Thomas said that a shortcut sounds like cheating.
That's true, yeah.
But that's not the point, right?
No.
The point is that someone has walked a very long path on their own, and maybe there are different routes that you can actually take to get to the same place. Maybe the road that they took, or the path that was on their journey, was maybe quite long, and others can learn from that. And instead of taking that same long journey, they can actually take a shortcut by taking a different route. So whether that's starting small, for example, with developer portals, maybe they had the intention of going all in on Backstage and doing everything that you could possibly think of in a developer portal and then letting it loose. But now you've heard from someone that it's actually maybe better to start small and then get it into the hands of the users, get them to give feedback, talk with them, and then you build on it, right? And then go from there. That's maybe a better path to the end result, which is then the portal that all the developers in your company is using.
Right. Or maybe start a community first. And that's shortcut. That cuts a lot of the other pains in the journey if you begin with a community.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that is really the essence of our podcast.
Yeah.
To help you find a shorter path to success. That's a wrap for today's episode of Shortcut. If you enjoyed our discussion, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite platform. Sign up for our Shortcut newsletter at our website, shortcu.tt, and receive our latest podcast straight to your inbox. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, and keep discovering shortcuts to engineering great products.